Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is my twice weekly roundup of news, sometimes controversial views, and better biking tips as well. Got a fairly packed show for you today. We had unfortunately, a very serious accident literally at the end of my road on Thursday, with a pedestrian being critically injured by a motorcyclist. A police car on an emergency call in Gateshead seriously injured 2 riders earlier this week too. Bike sales have fallen in May, but some good news. Fuel prices just may have peaked. A survey claims that 1 in 5 riders have sustained pothole damage. A London tower block fire was caused by a charging e-bike. Suzuki are offering free insurance in a competition, just as long as your bike doesn't cost more than £250 to insure, that is. And Zontes are bringing an all-new 350 single-cylinder to the UK, so we'll have a look at that as well. Nice to see a proper petrol engine bike for once. And finally, today's discussion point, although we're in the middle of a heat wave and it's a beautiful sunny day outside without a cloud in the sky, this kind of weather often breaks down with big storms. So we'll be having a look at flooded roads and the risk of aquaplaning, how to spot it and what you can do about it. So settle yourself down for the next 30 odd minutes whilst I work my way through my various items. Kevin has looked in. Good to see you, Kevin. Travelling on the M11 North, he says. Hopefully not whilst riding. All right, so just a quick reminder of what's in the pipeline for the next few days. Let's just get the relevant banner up. That's the one we want, not the video. All right, so events for the next few days from Survival Skills. There they are. Very quickly, the feedback on Wednesday's live online talk was so good, I had several requests to watch it after the event. So what I've done is I've created a rewind event, so you can access that recording. The talk, I'll remind you, was cornering and fixing cornering problems. So the idea was not to look at cornering from the usual how to corner better training perspective, but to take an objective look at how things go wrong in corners, why they go wrong, what goes wrong, and where they go wrong, and then to give you some ideas, some strategies to stay out of trouble when you possibly can, but know how to recognize the errors and get out of trouble when you realize you're making one. So I'd say it's genuinely life-saving advice. The rewind event is available until midnight on Tuesday, and you can book that from the coffee shop link, which is in the preamble to the show above. Now, second thing I just wanted to mention is that there are 2 ride outs also in the pipeline. Wednesday this coming week, the 13th, 6:30 p.m. I'm hoping to meet some people at St Albans to take them out for a nice ride over the Chilterns for 2.5 to 3 hours. At the moment, despite interest being professed, nobody's actually signed up for that. So I don't want to be riding on my own, folks. So do spread the word around and do come along if you possibly can. And then the other ride out is Saturday 23rd. That's a morning one, kicking off at 10 o'clock. That replaces the cancelled one in May, which was due to take place on roads out into Essex and Suffolk, which had to be cancelled due to a bike race that was going on at the same time, or anyway, a cycling event. The final thing I just wanted to mention was, as we're in the middle of some warm weather, yesterday's Skills on Saturday post on staying cool might be a good watch if you want to. So head back to that one if you possibly can. Right, okay, so where was I? That's the wrong picture. We'll come to that in just a moment. Now, on Thursday afternoon, I was in the car coming back from picking up the other half, who was at her volunteer job. When I found the main road at the end of our road was actually blocked off by police and fire appliances and the regular plastic tape across the road. Now, we went out for a walk that evening, sunset walk, so quite a lot later. and the barriers were still in place with a lonely copper patrolling the tape, and that never bodes well. And next morning I discovered via a local residents group that there'd actually been a serious traffic incident at about 3 p.m. The air ambulance had been scrambled. I actually heard it overhead. I didn't pay much attention. It's usually the police helicopter chasing miscreants, but it landed in the park just up the road, which is in fact where we went for our walk. And the Met Police have now put out an appeal for witnesses to the collision. It involved a motorcycle and it left a woman critically injured. The 39-year-old pedestrian was apparently crossing the road to go collect her children from school, and she remains, as of yesterday afternoon, in that critical state. The rider of the motorcycle was arrested at the scene. He was on suspicion of driving whilst under the influence of drugs. He was taken to hospital for treatment himself before being discharged to a local police station, where he was subsequently released under investigation and inquiries continue. The word on the neighbourhood group is that the witnesses said that the bike was actually pulling a wheelie at the time. Now, I hate to say it, but so often when we try to defend motorcycles to the wider public, we are our own worst enemy when it comes to PR. So, I don't want to moralize, but, just be sensible. If you're riding through an urban environment, these things can happen. People do cross roads. If you can't avoid them, then it's frankly your fault for going too fast. People do make mistakes and walk out in front of motorcycles that they haven't seen, particularly in traffic when motorcycles can appear from behind other vehicles. Right. Meanwhile, up in Gateshead, the rider and passenger of a motorcycle had been taken to hospital with what were described as serious injuries after a collision with a police car that happened on Friday. Now, Northumberland police have confirmed that the car was responding to an emergency at the time of the collision, and the road did remain closed for several hours. A spokesman said shortly after 3 p.m, we were called to the scene of a two-vehicle collision on Dunstan Bank in Gateshead, involving a police car which was responding to an emergency call out and a motorcycle, and that the emergency services were currently at the scene. They said that two people on the motorcycle were carried to hospital by the air ambulance with serious injuries. The police officer was taken to hospital as a precaution, and the spokesperson continued, as is standard practice in such circumstances, the collision has been referred to the independent officer for police conduct. As of yesterday afternoon, both motorcyclists remained in hospital. The police officer has been released. Sergeant Dave Roberts of Northumbria's Police Motor Patrols Department said yesterday, it's a serious collision which has sadly resulted in two people being hospitalised with serious injuries, and our thoughts with them and their loved ones at this distressing time. We're working hard to establish what happened in the moments leading up to the collision, and we are asking for any witnesses to get in touch to help us build a clear picture of what's happened. So, right, two nasty accidents there, different parts of the world, different circumstances. Don't forget, if you've got anything to say about any of these stories, do please drop me a line. I'm more than happy to respond either during the show if I possibly can, or after the show. I'll certainly get back to you at the end of the live show if I can. Now, the current political uncertainty, the cost of living crisis, supply chain difficulties, any or all of them could be responsible for a poor month of bike sales in May. The latest figures are just out, a bit later than normal because it's now July. And while sales figures over the first 5 months of the year are still up over the same period last year, most categories of bikes recorded in the sales charts sold fewer machines than in the same month last year. Now, clearly, the situation has been disrupted by COVID as well. So I wouldn't read too much into this at the moment, but the figures were 12,629 machines sold in May last year, down to 11,237 this year. So a drop of about 1,300, so down roughly 10%. The biggest drops were in the 51 to 125cc class and the over 1000cc. They dropped 14% and 18% respectively. The amazing story, really. I still, every time I read the figures, I still kind of look at it and think, wow. By combining the sales of the Meteor and the Classic, Royal Enfield's 350 single was the top selling motorcycle in the country with 280 sales. It was ahead of the second best selling motorcycle, the CBF 125 from Honda, of course. Only the perennial top seller, the NMAX 125 scooter, sold more units with just under 400 bikes registered back in May. New entrant in the chart with 90 bikes apparently sold is the NT 1100, which of course is the Tourer version of the Africa Twin. Triumph are in third place, Yamaha are in second, Honda remain the biggest manufacturer. Now, the good news is that indications are that fuel prices may have peaked on the commodities market. That's the bulk sales. Crude oil, wheat, and timber are all among the products which have dropped in price in recent weeks. Now, financial experts had pinned much of the inflation on supply chain disruption related to pandemic. Product shortages, lengthy delivery times, and prices shipping were the results, and they were predicted to last well into 2022, even back in 2020 when I first started doing these shows. I remember talking about the shipping container issues with lots of shipping containers either stuck full that weren't unloaded or empty that weren't being returned to ports. But the most recent indications suggest that these disruptions are finally easing, and the knock-on effect of this is that shipping rates on major trade routes are actually beginning to drop from record highs. And on the wholesale market, which more directly affects us because wholesale supplies the price, the petrol to the pump, wholesale gasoline prices are on the fall too, slowly, and that should trickle into retail pricing at the pump over the coming weeks. The local petrol station has actually gone down a penny a litre for petrol, which is, of course, a huge help to filling our bikes up. What else was I going to say? Oh, yes, I was just going to put the reminder up. Don't forget, if you do want to make sure that you catch the show, it goes out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11, nearly always live, very occasionally recorded, and on very, very rare occasions, I may miss a show due to other commitments. If you do miss a live show, you can pop over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK on the end, or you will find somebody removing Boy Scouts from horses' hooves. And you can catch all the 11s shows over there in one channel. And whilst you're over there, you might as well take a look at my 60-second safety videos too, the last one of which was actually a counter steering special. So do pop over there, take a look and see what I have done in the video department. Now, story I brought up the other day was that motorcyclists, motorists, and pedestrians, cyclists, what did I say there? Drivers, cyclists, and motorcyclists all seem to agree on one thing, and that's that we have far too many potholes on our roads which aren't being fixed. And I certainly don't disagree. And Motorcycle News says that a recent poll conducted by their insurance partners, they say at MCN Compare, have quoted that 1 in 5 motorcyclists claim to have had an accident or sustained pothole damage to their bike from obviously hitting a broken surface. Now, the poll asked just over 1,000 riders. I've actually got 2 back wheels for my XJ6. Something habit I've picked up years ago as a courier, when I could get a puncture, and a quick swap with a fresh wheel was easier than getting to the tyre fitters and getting a new tyre fitted or a plug punctured. And I've still got 2 back wheels for it, and both of them now have slight flats in the rim. Now I know exactly how one happened. It was a huge hole that I hit. Unfortunately, it was in the dark. It was very, very early in the morning, and it was that really awkward, not quite twilight conditions when the sky is just lighter than the shadows that you're riding through under trees. And I drove into it. I rode into it and out the other side without even seeing it. I've no idea what happened to cause the other one. It just suddenly appeared. Neither are bad enough to worry about. The rims aren't damaged. It's just there is a slight flat. I can feel it with a little bit of vibration through the rear wheel, and you can just see it when you spin it. But it'd be interesting to know who else has suffered that damage. Drop me a line. Let me know. Be more than interested to find out. Now, another scary story. Last month, a fire in a flat in a high-rise block less than a mile away from Grenfell Tower was started by charging an e-bike. Now, dozens of residents were actually forced to evacuate from this tower block, which was close to the building where 72 people died during that blaze back in 2017. The flat's resident, one Liban Shakat, said that the fire started in his guest's bedroom where his friend, who was staying for a few days, had been charging an e-bike battery. Now, the reports say that after the e-bike began smoking, the guest unplugged it, at which point it actually caught fire. Possibly these gases being emitted by the overheating battery were ignited by a spark, something I'll talk about a bit more detail next week, actually. It seems they then poured a bucket of water on the burning bike, which seems to have made the fire worse. Now, around 60 firefighters in the end had to tackle this blaze at Stebbing House in West London, and it took them around 90 minutes to actually bring the fire under control. Now, thankfully, thanks to the fire defences in the building, only the guest needed hospital treatment for smoke inhalation. The question I'd ask, though, is how many of us actually know to deal with a lithium-ion battery fire? Now, something I'll be looking at in a little bit more detail next week. Richard has just said, my council emailed the pothole reporting link to everyone on their newsfeed. I reported a few on my comment. I'll let you know if and when they get repaired. I'd certainly be very interested to see. Round here, they do seem to have fixed a few of the worst ones, but there was a period where they were coming out as painting white lines around the bits that needed to be repaired, and then nothing happened, so that several months later another team would come out and respray the white lines, and you have to ask yourself how much that cost when they could have sent somebody out to actually fix the pothole. And infamously, up the road, they reinstated speed bumps. They changed the profile as it's a bus route. It was obviously knocking the bus suspension to bits. They actually reprofiled the potholes, and they had to actually fill in a pothole which was under one of the speed bumps. But it's the stunning bit. They only filled half the pothole in, only the bit that was necessary to support the speed bump. The half that was actually on the normal road surface was left completely untouched. Sometimes the logic, I know it's their job description, but the logic to that is just barking mad, if you ask me. Right, we've got a couple of comments here. Samantha has said she's reported several, and each time Devon County Council say there is nothing wrong. Yes, that appears to be because definitions of what constitutes a pothole are wide, I suppose is the word to choose. What you and I might call a pothole, the council are looking at and saying not deep enough, not wide enough. Frankly, any hole in the surface, in my opinion, is a pothole. And Petro has said, good morning. Hello, Petro. Nice to see you here. Right, so how much do you pay for insurance, which I bet won't cover you for damage from potholes, but I'll take a punt that it's more than £250. But that's the maximum value of a free insurance policy that Suzuki, through its own insurance services, are giving away to one lucky winner. Now, the prize draw is actually open to anyone who owns a Suzuki motorcycle of any age, and to enter they simply need to enter the details into the random prize draw, with the winner picked on the 1st of August 2022. So you still have a few days to enter this. Michael Laflay, he's the Suzuki After Sales Programs Manager. He said, "We aim to provide the best prices and the best services possible to all our customers at a time with rising costs across the board and a looming cost of living crisis. Hopefully, this competition, we can make a real difference to the lucky winner." Now, although it doesn't actually say, I'm assuming that the price probably applies to policies taken out with Suzuki Insurance at renewal time rather than being a sort of a cash bonus that you can spend on any insurance. But that's not clear from the press release. As I suppose every little does help, as a certain insurance supermarket is keen to remind us. But I have to say that with insurance premiums frequently running into thousands rather than hundreds of pounds, it does seem a rather parsimonious prize. Competition's open now, closes at midnight, Sunday, 31st of July. And what else was I going to say? Don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, you can pop over to my coffee page. And if you buy me a coffee over there, you'll get access not just to these shows, but also hundreds of better biking articles over there, including the Skills on Saturday one I referred to at the top of the show. So I think it's probably the biggest resource that you'll find anywhere on the internet for better biking tips. And yeah, if you can spare the price for coffee, it helps me come back and keep writing better articles and keep producing these shows. Now, on to a real motorcycle for a change with a petrol engine. Now, I've always loved the sound and feel of a four-cylinder motorcycle ever since I got hold of my first CB404 a long time ago. But there's also something to be said for the sort of thudding progress you make atop a single-cylinder bike. I've owned a number in my time. The very first 125, of course, was a single. I went through 4 or 5 CB250 RSs whilst I was a courier, then graduated to an XBR 500. That was an interesting bike to ride. And finally, when I was instructing, I got hold of an NX 650 Dominator. Now, I've still got one of the 250s as it happened. So as you can see, I am a bit of a single cylinder fan. So when Chinese manufacturer Zontes announced an update to their 310cc engine with a 348cc motor back during last autumn's bike show seasons, I was interested to see firstly how the bike would pan out in the flesh of a production model, and secondly whether it would be coming to the UK, because a lot of Chinese bikes haven't yet made it. Now, in answer to the first question, I think the looks won't be to everyone's taste, but the answer to the second question is yes, it is coming our way and it'll be here very soon. So let's have a look at the bike. There it is. That is the new Zontes 350. The machine is a little angular in places for me, and I do think it has some fairly odd styling elements, but it does have some pluses. Let's just zoom in on some particular elements of the bike. If you look at that headlamp binnacle, the first thing I looked at that, and the first thing I thought was CX500, which is interesting. I have to say I don't like bikes with those bar end mirrors, and probably they work, but they tend to stick out quite a long way. I do prefer conventional mirrors. The lever protectors there are a bit sort of MotoGP stick on, aren't they? I wouldn't really worry about those. And I'm not really sure why there is a shroud over the front disc either. That seems to be completely pointless. And also, if you want pointless styling, have a look at that weird, what appears to be, again, plastic bit stuck over what presumably is the frame either side of the radiator. I've no idea why they have done that, unless the cast ole frame is so horrible that it's covering up some ghastly welding or something. But I really can't see any function to that other than making it difficult to get in there and clean the motor. And one thing that's missing at the far end of the bike is, of course, there is no pillion grab rail. Absolutely essential, I would have said, on a machine like this. But hey ho, I do like the twin exhaust and those spoked wheels, which are laced right out on the edge of the rim, look like they should take tubeless tyres, which is an essential element for a road bike, in my opinion, these days, and something that other manufacturers really should have adopted years ago. If the Chinese can do it on a bike like this, I have no idea why some of the top models still run tubed tyres for the road. There is also an option for alloy wheels, by the way, for this particular bike. Now, I did mention that the bike has a cast alloy frame. It's uprated over the 310s frame, it says, reinforced with external bracing. The bike also gets that banana style swing arm, which is shaped to go around the exhaust collector. And the header pipe apparently is 40% larger than before to help with gas flow. Now, up front, the upside down forks are up from 37mm, fairly thin and spindly, to 43mm, which should make them a lot more sturdy. The monoshock at the back is improved in terms of both the spring rate and the spring dimensions. The wheels are 17-inch, but the dimensions go up to 120/70 at the front and 160/60 at the rear. So you can get some pretty good tyres for this bike. The brake calipers are also uprated. The original 310 was fitted with Zontes' own brand brakes. This bike has JULY 4-pot radial calipers. They are a Brembo offshoot, you may recall, and they grip a single 320mm disc up front and a 260mm disc at the rear. The rear one looks a little bit on the large side, but they're both up again in size, presumably to cope with the higher performance, and dual channel ABS is of course standard. You do get keyless ignition and an immobilizer, so a nod towards bike security, something I was having a bit of a rant about last time out. You get a full color TFT dash and the now obligatory LED lighting. But the heart of the beast is the new motor. Now let's go and again just zoom in on that for you. That is the beast in question, and the bike with the new motor in, a little heavier than I would like to see, 188 kilograms, 414 pounds fueled up and ready to go. But frankly, the bike should deliver some reasonable performance if it matches the claimed specification, because Zontes are saying that the motor puts out 39 horsepower at 9,500 RPM. And of course, the model is A2 compliant with that weight to power ratio. Now, Zontes says that the majority of the parts are new, including the crankcase, the cylinder head, starter motor, and the oil pump. And that all helps boost torque, power, and acceleration. You also get a 30% larger air box, apparently, which makes not just more performance, but changes the sound of the bike. The original plans were for a higher power version pumping out 43 horsepower, but that's been shelved for the time being, at least, because that motor was said to produce excessive vibration. I can't tell you if the bike is fitted with a balance shaft, but the implication for that is it isn't. Now, the price point is somewhere between budget and premium. On-road price is $4,599, so not too wallet heavy. And it's said to be on trend for today's marketplace. Now, interestingly, most of the first delivery is actually pre-sold, but further deliveries are said to be on schedule. Now, I would say that the bike is actually a clear sign that Zontes is in a very serious in its quest to establish itself as a bona fide manufacturer of proper motorcycles, and to get away from the image of Chinese bikes being cheap and not very cheerful. And the success of this machine really could pave the way for the bigger engines that I've talked about that are under development. There is a 650 and a 1000 triple, both being worked on at this moment. So anyway, the little Zontes 350 should be in the showroom this month. Looks like a fun little bike to run around on. And Petro says, My first bike, CB100N. Oh God, yes, I remember those as well. Yes, brother's girlfriend had one. Would have one again, even though it only had 6-volt electrics and headlight. Not the brightest at night. You can say that again. Yeah, same lighting system on my CB125S. Would get 100 miles per gallon, which would come in handy right now. Yeah, absolutely. My first little 125. I put £6 worth of petrol in the bike to do 1,000 miles. Around Devon, Cornwall. Right, okay, on to the final item for today, which is the aquaplaning feature that I promised you last week. Now, you probably noticed, if you're a fan of tennis, it is the men's finals day today at Wimbledon. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, it's entirely not unusual for these events to be disrupted by heavy showers or even thunderstorms. Now, last week I was talking about the issues of adapting from roads that go from dry to wet to dry again, but also saying why we shouldn't trivialize these problems. If you missed it, it was show 251. But sometimes the storms are so heavy, roads actually get flooded by torrential rain. So this is what today's discussion point is all about. Now, first of all, this is how not to deal with a big puddle. If you dive into a puddle and you are pushing water out to either side like that, you've ridden into it far too fast. It's a good way to drown the engine. And in any case, if you hit a puddle like that at speed, it slows the bike down pretty rapidly. And the pressure on the tire can do strange things to the steering as well, like trying to wrench it out of your hands. But this isn't aquaplaning, so I'll be coming back to that in a few seconds. Now, it's obvious that you've no idea what's under the water either. There could be potholes, debris, sand, gravel. You simply don't know. I've even come across drain covers that are sat next to the hole that they were covering up after the water has receded. You can imagine the problems of actually riding into something like that and encountering a lifted drain cover, either hitting the drain cover or diving into the hole. So what I would say is treat any flood with caution. Where rivers have burst their banks, I would be even more cautious. I would always suggest finding another route. Now, there was an article in MCN from an adventure biker telling you how to ride through flooded rivers when we were having some floods a few years ago. But frankly, you really don't want to try and bring out your inner adventure biker and ride through something like a flooded river without a lot of thought. Now, river from water runs very quickly when there are floods. Even surprisingly small streams will actually flow very, very fast when they have broken their banks. And it's not unknown for cars to be swept away. So with just two wheels, I really, really wouldn't attempt it if you're not an expert and if there is no alternative to getting around that. I would cancel the trip if I couldn't get through water like that. I certainly wouldn't try to ride through it as MCN suggested you could a few years ago. And the second thing is ask yourself how deep the water actually is. Now, here's a nice calm looking scene. Let me get that up on screen. There it is, nice calm looking scene. Doesn't look too serious, does it? But just how deep is the water under that bridge? Now, years ago, not very far from where I'm sitting at this moment, in fact, I managed to get under a railway bridge at Park Royal, it was. When there was a midsummer storm, it flooded the area. The water under the bridge was sort of looking very similar to this, but I just happened to know that the footpath along the side of it was built up considerably higher than the road. So I rode up the footpath and out the other side, and the water came up somewhere around the wheel axles. Now, I think what was going to happen to the car driver behind me who followed me into that water, he stopped mid-flood with the water up over the bonnet. Now, the thing is, though, you're not going to aquaplane in any of those circumstances. That isn't the situation which causes the problem. Whoops, that's not the right picture. This is far more likely to be the kind of water that causes the problem. It's when it's awash with some standing water. Even this is probably a bit deep, but notice you can see the white line through the middle of the picture there. So the water is clearly not more than a few inches deep. And it's It's over a considerable distance. Now, normally the problem is you wouldn't actually think twice about riding through a shallow, just a sort of few millimeters of water, but so we don't tend to slow down. But this is actually, in my experience, what sets off aquaplaning. The Normally on a wet surface, your front tire is attempting to displace water to the side. That's how it's designed to operate. What it will do is it will push water either side of the front tire. That's entirely due to the shape of the tire, a little bit down to the grooves, but in fact you can ride on a almost slick tire in the wet, but that water is displaced to the sides. Now the trouble is, as the water gets deeper or your speed builds up, then that tire stops displacing the water sideways, and instead what happens is it starts pushing it ahead of the tire as a bit of a wave, and eventually what happens is that the tire actually rides up on that wave, and it basically, so the tire comes along, rides up on top of the wave, and now it is no longer in contact with the road surface. It's basically floating above the road surface, and as a consequence there is no grip. Now in my experience it normally affects just the front wheel, as the rear tends to follow in the trough cut by the front. It's basically the same principle that the sea cats operate on. Now, how do you recognize that you are about to be, or you are actually aquaplaning? Well, the bike will carry on in a straight line if you're upright, but the bars go kind of light and floaty. You don't hit the brick wall as you do if you run into deep water. You don't really feel any deceleration, but the bars actually start to go a bit light and floaty in the hand. In extreme circumstances, they even move from side to side whilst you're riding. It's a bit like riding on ice, I guess, but with the important difference that the rear wheel generally, in my experience, continues to push the bike forwards, whereas on ice, your first clue that there is a problem is actually often wheel spin. So what do? Well, the first thing is to think ahead. Anticipate where you might have this problem. Watch out for shallow sheets of water, maybe after a thunderstorm, maybe after prolonged rain. Watch out for places where runoff from a field will bring water to stand on a flat road. If it's on a hill, it'll all flow downhill. You may encounter mud on the road, you may encounter gravel, you may actually encounter water running down the hill, but you're not likely to find standing water. Somewhere else that you may find it is any surface which has sagged under the weight of lorries. Think about dual carriageways, which often have troughs where the lorry wheels go. You can often see that there is actually a long sheet of water in those. I would stay out of those if I possibly could. Wide dual carriageways are particularly bad because the camber can be non-existent. Now those roads were normally built with a concrete base, so not surprisingly the concrete was laid flat, or it would have sort of flowed off to the sides. So the standing water on those roads can be significant. Now cars will very often aquaplane on that easily, but it is possible for a bike to aquaplane. The other time it can happen, in my experience, is on a road which goes up or downhill, but is actually super elevated around the bends. Now, if you remember, crown camber is where the road comes up to a peak in the middle. Super elevation, the road is actually flat, and the whole road changes angle as you go round a bend. So of course what it does is it also can channel the water back and forth in a stream. In certain circumstances you can actually get literally a stream of water flowing down the road, being kept on the road by the super elevation. So yeah, watch out for that. If you see standing water, the first thing I'd do is slow down. If you see it too late to reduce speed, try to relax. Grip tight with your knees. Don't do anything harsh or sudden like bang on the brakes, and don't grip the steering too tight. If you lock onto the bars, you will actually make things worse. So the wiggling steering actually isn't a problem. It'll sort itself out so long as you stay loose on the bike and let the bike do its own thing. My solution, which seems to work for me, is that you simply roll off the throttle. And as the weight transfers to the front and the bike starts to slow down, the grip should come back as the front cuts through the water again. But don't apply the front brake for obvious reasons. If your front wheel is floating on the water and you put the brake on, the wheel's going to stop rotating before it comes back into contact with the ground. So you could lock it up. Maybe a gentle touch on the rear brake, but I would say in general, my experience, just roll off the throttle very slowly, and that should do the trick. Don't try to steer, because you won't be able to. Let the bike do its own thing, and it should sort itself out in a second or two, and you should be out the other side. Now, I would say again, in my experience, this is a rare problem for motorcycles, simply because of the shape of the front tire. If you think about a motorcycle tire, it's sort of V-shaped or rounded, and it cuts through the water. If you think about a car tire, it's much more like a barrel, and roll a barrel into water and the water will build up in front of it, even one with lots of grooves. I've aquaplaned quite often in a car. I've only aquaplaned seriously twice on a motorcycle. Once in Bastogne in Belgium, where the super elevation trapped the water on a descent out of the Ardennes. And once, it was rather close to home actually, it was the concrete road that runs through West Kingsdale, just up the road from Brown's Hatch. It's wide and flat, and the water was just covering the surface. Right, okay, that's pretty much it for today. Final thing, I'll actually send you off to Cycling Weekly today to read an article which you may enjoy, because it's all about Scott Redding, the former MotoGP star, the current World Superbike rider. He's also switched to competing at the elite level in the British Cycling National Road and Criterium Series. So it's actually worth reading for his experience of competing on two wheels, both powered and unpowered. I found that quite an interesting article. So here is the link. It's going up any moment with a bit of luck. That is it for today. If you missed the 21 show 251 with the first part of the wet riding, go back and have a look at it. And finally, don't forget the mini ride outs and the rewind option on Wednesday's live talk event. That's available till midnight on Tuesday. And last but not least, if you are out on the bike today, please try and stay shiny side up and enjoy your ride. Thanks for watching.